especially when you're trying to do stuff online, you're supposed to stay on certain subjects, right? Build your brand. Make yourself the expert of whatever niche or whatever that. So I've been wrestling with this for a while now because there's a lot of political and law enforcement related things going on in our country, legal things going on in our country that I would really like to be able to talk about. And normally my discussions are in and around neurodivergence, psychology, recovery, and I've shared in the past, but I'll share again. I was trained as a police officer. I never became a police officer myself. There's a lot of reasons why I didn't do that. And I might as well say one of the biggest reasons was I knew by the time I completed my training as a police officer, I was not confident that I could take a life if required. I'm not saying I couldn't physically do it. I just didn't know what that would do to me as a person. I'm very sensitive. Like, I didn't know what life would be like after I had to make a call like that. And so, yeah. That's a big reason why. Even when I switched political parties in 2008, I've always been a strong advocate for the law enforcement community. Throughout my stand-up comedy career, I have done dozens and dozens of fundraisers for law enforcement organizations, first responders, drug enforcement task force, all of these things, because we're all human. We need our men and women of the force to be safe, but we also need citizens to feel safe in at least the idea that if there is a bad actor on the other side, that they will be held to the same account that citizens are. And I really believed in law enforcement and in policing and community policing when I was in school in the 90s, 90 through 96. And those were some very rough years in our country. I don't know the age of the people listening, but I mean, this was during Rodney King. Oklahoma City bombing happened. Waco happened. Ruby Ridge happened. I mean, we had huge uprisings with law enforcement, standoffs, showdowns, you know, religious sects, white nationalists. I mean, everybody was teeing off. And the FBI was just outmanned and outgunned. So I understand why they accelerated and expanded it so much. You know, I do. You can't have another Oklahoma. You know, this is all, but this is all pre 9/11. So, but during that time, that was a real reckoning in the police community because of what happened with Rodney King. And obviously Rodney King looks a lot like now what happened here in Minneapolis after George Floyd. And it was a stark reminder to everybody. You know, I of course I can't speak for the, you know, the African American community, but me just watching it, I was like, see, shit, this happened in 93. I was in my major at that point. Like, we haven't gotten any further than this? For real? I mean, you know, here's something I need to clear up for people. If you're not really aware and you get most of your information from crime shows or crime podcasts, please, unless these people have some background in law enforcement and some actual credentials, please do not listen to them. A lot of bad information is getting out there. It's not helpful. At the time, during COVID 2020 in May, that Memorial Day weekend is when it happened. The footage of George Floyd and Derek Chauvin hit the internet, and you know how the internet is. It takes like a day before it really... So, and at the time, I was seeing a guy who lived on the south side of Minneapolis. Not in that exact neighborhood, but about a mile away. And so the next night I went over there and I'm like, oh, this is not good, you know? And they were starting to like shut down the freeways and close everything up. And I'm here to tell you, watching that video, I mean, this is what people don't understand. You're only allowed to use force, excessive force, in very few instances. And that is when a person is an immediate threat to you or others, basically, or themselves. If someone's having like a breakdown or something, right? But the word custody actually means in the care of, okay? So once you use the force to gain custody in care of the suspect who is not guilty yet and needs to be treated as such, once they are in your custody, your care, you are no longer permitted by law to continue use of excessive force. That was the problem with George Floyd. He was handcuffed with his arms behind his back. He was no longer a threat physically to any of the officers or anybody in the area. And 8 minutes, man. People were begging him to stop. And I only touched on it, to community policing. One of the things that was a popular movement, at least in the 90s, and I don't see it anymore, but was this idea of community policing. And they were also very encouraging of law enforcement to live in the communities that they served, right? And if you think about it, it makes sense, because then it is more of, you know, they know who to go to with the problems in the neighborhood without it getting to the point of a situation, right? But because law enforcement, the bad apples that do exist, the bad actors that have escaped prosecution, it has eroded our overall trust of whether we're going to get a fair shake or not if someone does something wrong, right? Derek Chauvin didn't live in that community. Derek Chauvin lived in a community around here. It's a suburb. It's very white. Minnesota is very white. Almost all of the African American population lives in a very, very dense particular area. A few pockets around the Twin Cities. And that isn't by accident. And Minnesota has done better than most states in kind of going back and walking back and admitting like, yeah, we really did screw over the black community, because they built basically a freeway right in the middle of their Black Wall Street. And yeah, we definitely screwed the Native American community, but you know, and so some attempts have been made to, you know, you can never correct the mistakes of the past, but at least own it, which I appreciate. But when there's this community policing, the idea is that you are also part of that community. So you're not looking at the people that you're serving as an invading force. Okay? Cops feel scared because as much as they are required to enforce the law, I mean, don't think that they don't imagine a situation where all of a sudden they're under attack and they know how people feel about police officers. I mean, that's a really hard reality to wake up every morning and go, well, let me brush my teeth and go out and deal with humanity. You know, obviously COVID played in. Obviously, a lot of all of the vitriol and anti-Black Lives Matter protest, you know, stuff, and everything that was culminating in at the end of the first, you know, Trump presidency, all just whoosh, right there. But the other thing that people get wrong a lot about Minneapolis, and this is how it happens a lot of times with headlines, especially about police stories and crime stories, is if you only hear about the beginning of the story and you never listen to the resolution, you don't really ever learn the facts. And one of the things that got lost in the after coverage was the narrative nationally went out that Minneapolis, that we set our own city on fire, that the residents started these fires in their neighborhood. Okay? I think we all heard that. Well, of the fires that were started in Minneapolis and St. Paul during that uprising, that's what they like to call it. I would call it a peaceful protest that people jacked. People that started the fires that were convicted of arson. Most of them drove in from out of the Twin Cities. The one guy who started the majority of the stuff down on Lake Street came in full battle gear. He had a mask, but he had like glasses covering him. He was completely black, head to toe, blah, blah, blah. And so this is where people got this idea that there was an Antifa presence. That was not the result of the investigation. Most of these people were kids. No one was even mad really at Cup Foods, the place where he was, where, you know, where it all started with the counterfeit $20 bill that he passed. And, you know, the man who called the cops, they interviewed him right after that, and he was just devastated because he was like, I wish I just would have let it go. I wish I would have just pulled 20 out of my own pocket and put it in the drawer. I wish none of this had ever happened. And it shouldn't have. Not for $20. $20. No one was mad at the neighborhood. Everybody was mad at Derek Chauvin. But, you know, again, I believe still in the criminal justice system. I believe still in law and order. What I don't believe in anymore, though, is the lies that everybody around this subject is telling themselves, that nothing else can be done, that nothing different can be done, and that this is the way it has to be, that we have to have 100% control. It's not going to work. And, you know, the Fourth Amendment is one that people, they be forgetting about. First Amendment, freedom of speech. Second Amendment, right to bear arms. Third Amendment, another one people forget about, that's the Quartering Act. That means that the government can't make you put soldiers up in your house like they did pre-Revolutionary War, okay? But the Fourth Amendment, it's, you know, this is where we get things in terms like the castle doctrine, that your home is your castle. All right? Quiet enjoyment is a real estate term that you get with buying a property, that you're going to be able to have quiet enjoyment of that property, right? Being a property owner, it is in our Constitution because it was written by property owners. But if you have enormous rights to be free of unlawful search and seizure by the government. Okay, which meant that like there were parameters. It couldn't just be knocking up on someone's house in the middle of the night either. There were parameters. This was 250 years ago. So this is not a new problem with people trying to overstep. You know, this is the sheriff of Nottingham. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, this is not new. But one of the things that is so new and could never have been planned for by our founding fathers is technology. You know, this started back with the wiretap. When they finally got the ability to tap phones, right? And do a wiretap, what would happen is if I am investigating a crime and I believe that I will be able to get information to prove that this person's a criminal and prove the case and da-da-da-da. But the only way I'm going to be able to get this information, I can't get it through normal detective work. I can only get this information if I violate their Fourth Amendment rights and I record them or I listen to their conversation, right? And you would have to plead your case in front of a judge. And then the judge would either say yes or no and give you a wiretap warrant. Okay? And then you would have the legal authority to violate someone's Fourth Amendment rights by surveilling them without their knowledge. Right? So that one was that's a big one that technology took away. Right? The second big one is after 9/11. Prior to 9/11, we did not have a thing called TSA. We did not have Homeland Security. These were not departments that were in our government. Okay? The Founding Fathers could not have envisioned a modern airport. And your Fourth Amendment rights from unlawful search and seizure, this is when they start mitigating and balancing the need for security, but also the need to not infringe upon people's rights. For younger viewers, or if you're not familiar, in the late 60s, that was when we saw a very large spike internationally of hijackings on airplanes. And so this is when a lot of these concerns are starting to grow, right? We need to make all of this more secure. But we also can't violate people's rights. So what we're going to do is we're going to hire a private security company outside of the government. And those people will investigate the bags. They're the ones who will give the pat downs. They'll double check and make sure no one's getting onto the plane with any weapons or whatever, right? And then the Fourth Amendment is okay because the government isn't doing it. Someone else is doing it. And then if they find something that's bad, and we have to make an arrest, then the private security company will talk to the liaison, the police liaison at the airport, coordinate with law enforcement, and then law enforcement will take them into custody after the probable cause has been established by the security guard. Okay? After 9/11, the government passed the Patriot Act. And the Patriot Act was the largest power grab up until this big, beautiful bill that we've ever really seen. In the Patriot Act, it made it legal for the government to basically surveil anything as long as they could kind of maybe point the finger at the fact that maybe you were involved in international terrorism, or maybe you were money laundering, or maybe you were traveling in one place to another and we don't like it, right? This is when they start tracking all this international banking. This is when they start putting banking sanctions on whole countries. But through this, we can't have another 9/11 happen, right? We can't trust this outside security force to do a good enough job because they let all these hijackers through on the same day. Well, and they did. I mean, there's no denying that, right? That got missed. But because of this, the Patriot Act is passed. Homeland Security is created. Now, at this point, this is when the government openly creates a hole in the Fourth Amendment in front of all of us and says, you have a legal right to be protected from unlawful search and seizure by the government unless you're in an international airport. Or any airport, probably, but specifically an international airport, because law and order is more important than your Fourth Amendment rights. And when you buy an airline ticket, if you've ever read the contract of carriage, which I actually have, because yes, this is the proof. These are the things that I'm telling you. Yes, I do read these things. Like, I am neurodivergent. There is no lie there. Yeah, I read the whole flippin' thing. But there's some very disturbing things in there as well. You read your contract of carriage, go to whatever airline you use, and look what their public disclosure is. I've worked in, banking and finance for a really long time. You have to remember, they have to tell you somewhere. The devil's in the details. The truth is always in the details, but they just assume and hope, fingers crossed, too inconvenient, no one will bother looking. Of course I looked. But they have taken it so much further now with smartphones. And it's right there in your contract of carriage. People are saying, I can't believe I was stopped. And they looked at my cell phone and there were memes that were negative towards, like the vice president, right? And that guy was denied entry into the United States because of that. And they're sitting there going, well, they don't have the right to... They don't? Yeah, they do. They have the right to scrub your social media sites. They have the right to look anywhere they want on the internet. This is your airline, not just even the government, not just even TSA, not just even Homeland Security. They can look. And if they don't like it, what do? Well, I don't know what they do. They're not saying that in the contract of carriage, right? So now we're at ICE. And now they're not even pretending. Now they're not even pretending about the Fourth Amendment. They're not even pretending. When people are saying due process, right? I think a lot of people hear that term and they're like, I think I should know what that means. I'm pretty sure I know what that means, but I'll just spell it out a little bit. Due process is making sure they didn't violate your Fourth Amendment. Due process also includes the rest of your amendments, like your amendment protections, like the Fifth, like pleading the Fifth. You do not have to testify against yourself. Now, why did they make that the Fifth Amendment? Because in England, they'd make you do it. You'd have to testify regardless. You couldn't just say, I plead the Fifth. I'm not going to answer questions about that because it recriminates me. Or I incriminate myself. They were like, sing, bitch. You better talk. All of these things are there for a reason. Because people that like to act like kings do it. This is why. This is why. ICE is just the extension. They're not even bothering to hide it anymore. Which I think is really alarming and disconcerting for a lot of Americans. I've known that they've been doing this. I mean, not this open thing with ICE, but I've known that we haven't had real Fourth Amendment protections in this country since 2002. I mean, the phony baloney they gave us about why we even went to war after 9/11 was because maybe, possibly, some of the terrorists, went through there once. That was it. It was just an excuse. It was just an excuse. It was just an excuse to grab more control and grab more power. And it's also during, these early 2000s that, people like Edward Snowden and people like that start realizing, like, wait a minute. This is in violation of people's privacy and their Fourth Amendment rights. And the other thing about the Patriot Act was that was supposed to be emergency powers. Always be aware of emergency powers. Because it seems like there's always an emergency again whenever they need to renew the emergency powers, right? But it was supposed to sunset after 4 years, the Patriot Act. It was supposed to just get us through 9/11, right? So it was supposed to go from 2002 to 2006, I believe. 4 years. And then, of course, we're still in danger. Oh boy, shoot. Hate to do it. Better just keep violating them rights. Better renew that one for another 4 years. So then that one goes for 4 years. And then it is due to sunset again under President Obama. President Obama didn't walk it back either. But I want to double down on this. If you were traveling by airplane anytime soon through an international, through the United States systems, but in an international airport right now, if you take away only one thing from all this crap I just dumped on you, Take away this. They absolutely have a right to look at everything and judge you for it and use it against you. And because you are in an airport, you really do not have any Fourth Amendment rights. They do not have to have probable cause in the same level that they would if they had to knock on your door or come to your work or pull your car over even. There's almost no requirement. It's so minimal. You just have to look suspicious. And always let people know where you are. Share your location when you're traveling by air too. Make sure you're sharing your location with someone in case something happens. At least then they can track if you were detained or taken out at the airport. At least it'll track to where they are processing you, and hopefully your people can find at least that. Be careful. I don't know. I bet you this won't get a lot of views on YouTube. The algorithm's gonna be like, stomp this down. But I mean, like, it's in the contract of carriage. It's always in the details, guys. I don't need to make up things to scare you. This is scary enough.